Jonathan Bowen here from Corsac Props, and as you can see, I'm wearing something crazy. This is a sample of scale mail armor that I've been working on for the last couple days. It's all foam. It's attached to nothing but a generic t-shirt, actually. It's extremely flexible, bends, contorts. This obviously was just not very skin tight, so it's kind of looking like a big giant, I don't know, shield almost. But this was just using a shop shirt, something a little more form-fitting, would give you a little more contour. And I'm also using the medium scales, so they're bigger and heavier. But this is something like a bigger, heavier guy would wear. Obviously I haven't finished all the way up to the top yet. I did kind of stop. I found a good stopping point because it's getting obvious that it requires a little more finesse to get it to lay right and to get it to look good. But it's pretty stout. I mean, this stuff is stuck on here, and this video is going to show you how to make one of these, and you know, what products we used and all of that stuff. To be perfectly honest, we are making these scales available. They'll be up in our Etsy store. We're going to have several different variants. This is the medium-sized dragon scale armor. So we'll have small, we'll have large, and we'll also have a fish scale. And then we're going to start doing some creative things after that. So essentially, this is what we're making. So let's cut to some of those videos, and we'll show you how all of that's come together. Okay, so here's our foam scales. These are made from 2mm EVA. They're all connected on little sprue lines that you'll need to be, you'll have to have a cutter for. So this is obviously what we need for the project. We're also going to need, like I said, an X-Acto knife, something to cut these off the sprue and to cut them off from each other. They come in rows of 7 in this size. This is Super 80. It's rubber and vinyl glue. In the UK, it may be called something different. It's a 3M 80. We're using this because it's a little different than Super 70. We're using this craft foam for feeding inside the shirt. So we don't want the shirt to stick to itself. And obviously we have a shirt. This is some nasty shop shirt I had that's got super glue and expanding foam all over it. So it's still structurally sound, so we decided to go ahead and use it for this, and that it would be a good candidate for that. I believe this is a XXX t-shirt, just to give you guys an idea of how big it is. Obviously I'm not. So we're going to go ahead and put the foam, or the craft paper, up underneath inside the shirt. And what this does is it prevents the shirt from sticking to itself, because this stuff will soak into the fabric, and that's what you want, is it to soak into the fabric, but you don't want it to soak in and connect both sides of the shirt together while you're at it. So this craft foam prevents that. It also prevents it from sticking to the table and other things. This does have an odor to it, so make sure you're in a well ventilated area. So we're going to go ahead and spray that on here in a nice even coat. We're going to try and get as even as possible, because you want it. This is a little stringier. If you're used to Super 77, this is stringier and a little stranger. But for the most part, it's pretty easy to work with. It does have an odd sort of time to it. Once it's sprayed, it wants 4 minutes to set, and it has a 4 minutes to like 30-minute working time. So once that's coated, that's going to start curing, and we're going to go ahead and shoot the foam. Now, I shot all 3 of these at the same time. You can do it in various ways. This setup worked pretty good, doing all 3 at one time. However, as we continued with the shirt, this became problematic to do the entire sheet together, mostly because you end up handling the sheet a lot, and then glue gets everywhere. I mean, glue's going to get all over you anyway. It was problematic. So in the end, when I continued making the rest of the shirt, I did end up cutting all of those little sections of 7 scales off of each other. Now they're connected to each other, so you can lay them down in strips, and we'll show that here in a minute. And obviously it makes a big mess. So we're waiting for the shirt to sort of dry, and doing this one sheet at a time is
is probably the best. It just depends on what your how fast you are, and also the size, because the smaller scales have many more scales per sheet, but you're laying each individual row down, and that can just take time. And you want it, like I said, even coats, and you want to make sure that everything is connecting and gluing down, and you're not getting too old. Now, if it does get too old, you just spray another layer on it, and it usually works pretty good. And like I said, and then something I did notice, this was towards the end of a can where we were using this. Using the brand new can right off the shelf that we had to switch to almost towards the end of this project, it's very strong. It comes out really, really strong. And part of the problem with it is it's very runny. It's liquidy, but then that liquid congeals and it starts to make a great connection, and that's why it's really good, because it starts off watery and it soaks into a fabric, soaks into the material, and it allows you to really get a good adhesion. But as you can see, it makes a disastrous mess on the paper and soaks through a lot. In fact, the other side actually gets a little bit on it usually. I didn't bother cleaning any of that. You could if you're really worried about it, but it sort of
Okay,
peels up.
so the glue's kind of dry now. We're going to go ahead and start laying these down. We're running this video, I think, at 2x here, just because it's quite a lengthy process. It's definitely one of those projects that take a lot of time investment, so it's good to like put something on the TV and just kind of sit back and have a good time. The scales go down, and in hindsight, what I did here was not concentrate too much on their actual positioning. So if I had been better about getting them in there, and it's difficult to shoot a video and do something like this because it really kind of takes a lot of fine, close work, and it's hard to videotape that, worrying about keeping your head out of frame and stuff, and get this stuff to lay down. But they do go down pretty easy. It's just, like I said, kind of laborious. And we'll start with this second row here. This is when you start laying that second row in. I tend to try and get the point of the previous one to fit into the valley of the next one, of the previous one. That way the rows kind of have a very good offset. You get that good offset look, and everything keeps moving smoothly. The only issue with that that we found later was that further up the shirt, we started to notice there was kinks, because, and it was really just positioning. We needed to take the rows, each individual row, and kind of offset them from each other so that they didn't all have a open seam at the same point, because they're all connected to each other, and what you really want is them to be connected together, but not to have like obvious gaps. However, if you do need it to be more flexible, because this tends to not be very flexible because it's got all of these connections in it, you can go through and cut those connections out, and that will help free up the shirt. That has to be kind of done in the application process. I guess you go through later and do it, but that is not as easy. So if you are looking for something, you want more fluidity or more following a contour, that's something you'd have to look at. But like I said, the process is pretty simple. As you can see here, this is not taking too long, and you do have a little bit of repositionability. You can reposition a little bit if there is an issue, but once they sit for a little bit, they're gonna kind of adhere and not come off from each other. So it starts to look good. I think in hindsight, should have done a wider swath to begin with, but so that again was a little problematic later on with the point where we have this shirt now. Coating the rest of it in that material would be not a terrible job, but doing one whole ring all the way around might be problematic. But finding a good seam point would be pretty good without having to worry about. having the pieces fit on top of each other. So, but you can, if they're staggered like this, you can just tuck one in up underneath the other one. It's a little harder to position it, but that's how you continue a hard line like that. And putting this shirt on's not terrible when the complete, but I think it definitely would need some expansion joints or something for the future. But it's coming along pretty good. We'll definitely show a little bit more of this process, and then we kind of cut the video, and I went in and just did several hours of just laying these scales on, and then we'll show how everything is painted and how the process we came up with, which was actually pretty good. So we'll cover that in another part of this video. But as you can see, it's looking pretty good, and once this dries and cures and we get the rest of it done, we'll be able to show the painting process and how all of that comes together, and the final product, which you've already seen. Okay, so we're just about ready to paint. We've got the shirt quite a bit done. As you can see, we've got a ton of scales on this guy. So this is how it looks, at the point where we decided to stop and start the painting process and showing how that works. How we paint this is we're going to be using Future Floor Wax. This is Pledge Floor Care, which is the same stuff. Future Floor Wax doesn't actually exist anymore. This is it's an acrylic floor wax. Obviously, we're going to need some brushes, and this is Rub and Buff. This is the key to the whole thing. Rub and Buff is great. I've heard amazing things from lots of different people. Adam Savage, Bill Durand, anybody who's done a lot prop work is probably familiar with it. It's first time I've ever used it, and I really enjoyed it. So what we're going to do is we're going to coat the entire piece with Future Floor Wax. I'm going to do 2 coats actually. The first coat, this is to seal the foam in. Now it provides a good barrier. It gives you a good flexible barrier. Essentially, this is it's an acrylic base, but when you're done with it, it's still flexible. However, it's annoying. As you can see, when you're painting with anything, I've tried chip brushes, I've tried foam brushes. These bubbles show up, especially on an amorphous shape like this. This is very textured. So as you're painting down on this, you're going to get all of these bubbles. Now, they're not hypercritical, you get rid of all of them, but these big sections of them, you do want to remove all the bubbles. And how I got rid of them, as you can see, is I just kind of smoothed the flat of the brush over it, kind of break them up, get them out of there. And they're not too critical, but they will show up in the final piece because this coating, once it dries, if it's got these bubbles in it, it'll create a rough texture. You might be able to use that to your advantage, making a distressed piece or something, but because it's not very controlled, it's probably very hard to do. But as we continue, it's basically you're going to keep just make sure you coat the entire thing. That's sort of why I did 2 coats. It looks it felt good to get 2 coats on there to make sure that I got good adhesion, a good base primer, for lack of a better term, and then we'll go over it with the Rub and Buff. So this works out pretty good, and again, this is one of those projects that takes quite a bit of time. So just sit back and enjoy yourself. And you can also airbrush this. I've heard conflicting things. Some of the guys don't like throwing it through their airbrush because they worry about it, but I've never heard anybody have an actual issue. A single action brush would probably be better. Like I have a Pache H8 that I have no problems throwing this through. It's also can be used for a bunch of stuff. This is, if you've ever heard of what colloquially is called magic wash, this is the same material or the same chemical that's used to make that. And what's neat about it is
meniscus of the fluid is lower, much lower than water. So you can actually mix this with water, and what it does, it allows it to flow. So it's used in weathering on miniatures, mainly, like tabletop miniature gamers will use it. That's where I first heard about it, and they use it to paint, because you can use a water-based acrylic wash to bring out some of the deeper details and to fill in some stuff so you don't have to paint them, especially on smaller stuff, because I used to do a lot of 15 millimeter, which is like 1/100 scale stuff, really tiny. And this is what you would use to get those details to pop out, and then on top of that you could do a dry brush. And what I would use it for in a situation like this is, if I wanted to go back over this and distress this, I would mix, and I did a little experiment with it, but I would definitely mix this with a like a burnt umber, because you can add acrylic paint to it. So you add a little bit of acrylic paint to give it a pigment. You cut it about 50-50 with water and the floor wax, and it makes a good wash. And you can put that on pretty much anything, especially stuff that's got a lot of details. It'll flow into them details. It's not so handy in all situations when it comes to prop building, because prop building you can go with the different methods that give you a little more control, but it's definitely something to keep in mind and maybe experiment with. So we won't make you sit through this whole process, but the rub and buff is going to add that metallic texture that we're looking for, and we're going to go ahead and show you how that came out. So we're going to start the painting process here, and we're using rub and buff for this process. Now this is a wax impregnated powder. It's a metallic powder embedded in a wax, so when it dries it leaves a really nice finish, and to its name, you can even buff it. It's basically implanting metal on whatever you're using. We're also using a foam brush to apply it. It seemed to be the best way to do it that we found. There was maybe a better way of using an actual like sponge or something, because we did go through a lot of brushes because the tips started to deteriorate pretty fast, and maybe using some sort of just a sponge, like even a kitchen sponge, would have given us longer longevity of the tool, but also maybe been able to kind of sculpt it in a way to get into some of the corners a little bit better. But that's not what we were worried about. The big problem we did have is that when you apply that first dab of rub and buff to the foam brush, you end up having like almost a hot spot. It worked out well because the armor looks like it's worn, and maybe there's some areas that are cleaner than others, and so it worked out fine with the overall look of the piece. But it may not be what you're looking for, so even a brush, actually brushing this on, may be better, because then you can get in there. We wanted the shadowy look of what happens as you paint the scales. We're not really getting up underneath and into them deep valleys, because they're not important. They look cool. They give a cool shadowy effect just by hitting that top layer. That's really what we were going for. If you wanted something more bright and a little deeper, then you'd have to get in there and really either pull up every scale and get up in there, or get a tiny brush and get in there. And I'm pretty sure the rub and buff will work fine with a brush. Getting it out might be interesting, but there's probably instructions on that. I think it said something about some chemical could be used to clean it up. But the process is pretty simple. We're just like coating and getting it off, getting it all over the surface there. I did end up using the side of the brush a little bit more later on, because the tips fell apart pretty quick, and so what I started doing towards the end was putting the pigment further up on the brush, and then working it in slowly instead of having, so it prevented some of them like hot bright spots where a lot of pigment goes down, and you don't really want that. This is basically the equivalent of a dry brush technique. So you could also like get a piece of plastic or something, and or even on the paper itself, and put a dab on there and bring that brush through that to get a little bit of pigment on it, and then brush it on, and keep doing that over and over and over again, sort of like you would with a dry brush. But the effect came out pretty cool. This process again took quite a bit of time, but it wasn't too terrible, and the result is pretty good. We're happy with how this piece is coming out. This whole piece took several of those brushes. The problem was the tip kept falling apart, and so then it would just leave that plastic reinforcement bit in there, and that's problematic. So when you're trying to paint this, but overall it came out great, and we're really happy with it.
So now, once we finish the rub and buff step, so we've coated everything, we can, like I said, go over this again, maybe shine it up more if we wanted to. But for right now, we like the way it looks. We like the way the cool, aged metallic look it's got. And we sealed this all with the Future Floor Wax. So it's a little bit of a shiny coat when you're done with the Future Floor Wax, but it helps protect and keep that rub and buff from rubbing off on stuff and the like. But like I said, the scales are going to be available in the Etsy store. So if you want to check the link in the comments for that. We're also going to be doing more video content. We're trying to get that all geared up and get maybe even some regular stuff happening. Maybe even some Twitch stuff where we work on things. So we're still formulating all of that and trying to work it into a schedule that's going to work for us and for, to keep everything regular. But if you do want to keep up with all of that, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel where we'll be posting most of that. And check out our Facebook page. The link's also in the description, because that's where we'll post like random projects we're working on, pictures of progress, and things I'm making for either myself or other people, or commissions we're working on. And just make sure you check out the store. And like I said, if you have any ideas for future products, or if you just want to show us off some of the stuff that you've done with our products, or just with this technique, or anything, then go ahead and post that on our Facebook page, or post it in the comments down here. We'd love to see what you guys come up with, what you guys do. And we just enjoy seeing everybody kind of come together. We like to learn from each other, and that's kind of what we're all here for. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you it was informative, and it'll give you a lot of great ideas for stuff you can do later on.